Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the world you inhabit is not the one you thought you knew. The sun still rises, the city still hums, and the faces you pass on the street remain familiar, yet something fundamental has shifted beneath the surface. You sense it in the way people glance at you, furtive, measuring, as if searching for a sign that you might be different. There is a subtle tightening in the air, a collective breath held just out of reach, as if the world itself is waiting for you to make a move. You feel it in your bones, the unspoken rule that to stand out is to invite suspicion, that to be truly yourself is to risk exile from the invisible web that binds society together. As you step outside, the city's rhythm seems unchanged, but you notice the choreography of conformity everywhere. The way people dress, the cadence of their conversations, the opinions they share, each detail carefully curated to blend in, to avoid the sharp edges of individuality. You wonder, when did the world become so afraid of the person who dares to walk alone? When did the individual become a threat, a problem to be managed, a deviation to be corrected? You find yourself standing at the edge of a new reality, the truth dawning on you all at once. Society, for all its talk of progress and freedom, is built on a quiet, persistent fear of the individual. Not the individual as a consumer, a voter, or a cog in the machine, but the individual as a sovereign mind, unpredictable, uncontainable, unwilling to be defined by the collective. The paradox is as old as civilization itself. We celebrate the myth of the lone hero, the visionary, the rebel. Yet in practice, we shun those who refuse to bow to the group. We erect monuments to independence, but in our daily lives, we punish those who embody it. Suddenly, you're faced with a moment that makes you question everything you thought you knew about belonging, about safety, about the price of acceptance. You recall the stories you were told as a child, tales of pioneers and revolutionaries, of artists and thinkers who changed the world by refusing to conform. But you also remember the warnings, the subtle lessons woven into the fabric of your upbringing. Don't stand out, don't make waves, don't be too different. The world, it seems, is a stage where everyone is expected to play their part, and those who improvise risk being cast out. As you walk through the city, you notice the small acts of self-censorship that shape every interaction. The way people laugh at jokes they don't find funny, nod in agreement with opinions they secretly question, hide their true feelings behind masks of politeness. You feel the weight of these invisible chains, the pressure to conform that seeps into every corner of life. You wonder, what would happen if you let your guard down, if you spoke your mind without fear, if you lived as if you owed nothing to the expectations of others? The contradiction gnaws at you. On one hand, society claims to value authenticity, creativity, and self-expression. On the other, it rewards those who fit in, who follow the script, who never stray too far from the norm. You see it in the workplace, where innovation is praised but dissent is punished. You see it in schools, where children are taught to think for themselves but graded on their ability to regurgitate accepted truths. You see it in politics, where leaders promise change but demand loyalty above all else. You begin to sense the existential tension at the heart of the human condition, the longing to be seen and accepted for who you truly are, and the fear that doing so will lead to isolation, rejection, or worse. You feel the pull of the collective, the seductive comfort of belonging, but also the quiet desperation of those who have sacrificed their individuality for the sake of acceptance. You wonder, is it possible to be both fully yourself and fully part of the world? Or is the price of belonging always the surrender of something essential? As you take your first breath this morning, a startling realization settles in. Nothing will ever be the same. You can no longer ignore the subtle violence that society inflicts on the individual, the way it polices difference, enforces conformity, and punishes those who refuse to play along. You see it in the way people talk about weirdos, troublemakers, outsiders, always with a hint of fear, as if individuality is a contagion that must be contained. You see it in the way institutions are designed to smooth out rough edges, to turn unique souls into interchangeable parts. You begin to ask yourself questions that have no easy answers. Why does society fear the individual? What is it about a person who refuses to conform that provokes such anxiety, such hostility, such relentless pressure to change? Is it because the individual exposes the fragility of the collective, the arbitrariness of its rules and values? Is it because true individuality is a reminder that freedom is possible, that the world could be otherwise? Or is it something deeper, a primal fear of chaos, of unpredictability, of the unknown? You recall moments from your own life when you felt the sting of exclusion, the cold shoulder of the group, the subtle cues that you were not quite one of us. You remember the times you bit your tongue, hid your true thoughts, played along to avoid conflict. You wonder how many others are doing the same, living lives of quiet desperation, longing to break free, but afraid of what might happen if they do. The paradox deepens. The more society fears the individual, the more it needs them. It is the outliers, the misfits, the visionaries who drive progress, who challenge the status quo, who force the collective to evolve. Yet these same individuals are often the first to be ostracized, silenced, or destroyed. You think of Galileo, condemned for seeing what others could not, of Socrates, executed for asking dangerous questions, of countless artists, thinkers, and rebels who paid the ultimate price for daring to be themselves. You begin to see the outlines of a hidden struggle, a war between the forces of conformity and the irrepressible drive of the individual to assert their uniqueness. It is a battle fought in every family, every school, every workplace, every nation. It is the silent engine of history, the source of both our greatest achievements and our deepest tragedies. You ask yourself, what would it mean to live in a world that truly embraced individuality? What would happen if we stopped fearing difference and started celebrating it? Could we build a society that honors the unique spark in each person, that sees diversity not as a threat but as a source of strength? Or are we doomed to repeat the same patterns, to sacrifice the individual on the altar of the collective again and again? The questions swirl in your mind, refusing to be silenced. You feel the weight of history pressing down on you, the accumulated wisdom and folly of generations. You sense that you are standing at a crossroads, that the choices you make, whether to conform or to rebel, to hide or to reveal your true self, will shape not only your own life but the world around you. You realize that the fear of the individual is not just a social phenomenon, but a deeply personal one. It is the fear that lives inside each of us, the fear of being alone, of being misunderstood, of being rejected. It is the fear that keeps us from speaking our truth, from pursuing our dreams, from becoming who we are meant to be. It is the fear that whispers in the dark, telling us to play it safe, to stay small, to blend in. And yet you cannot shake the feeling that something vital is lost when we give in to this fear, that the world becomes smaller, duller, less alive, that the price of conformity is nothing less than the death of the soul. You wonder, is it possible to face this fear, to move through it, to claim your place as a true individual in a world that wants you to be anything but? As the day unfolds, you find yourself drawn to those who refuse to play by the rules, those who speak their minds, who live on their own terms, who are unafraid to be different. You see the courage it takes to stand alone, the strength required to resist the pull of the crowd. You begin to suspect that the true measure of a person is not how well they fit in, but how bravely they stand apart. You feel the tension building, the sense that something important is at stake. You know that the answers will not come easily, that the path ahead is fraught with danger and uncertainty. But you also sense that the journey is necessary, that the only way to truly live is to confront the fear that keeps us small. As the sun sets and the city lights flicker on, you are left with a single, burning question. What are you willing to risk in order to be yourself? What price are you willing to pay for the freedom to think, to feel, to create, to exist as a unique and unrepeatable being? And what would it mean for you, for society, for the world, if you chose to embrace your individuality, no matter the cost? The night deepens, and with it, the sense of urgency. You know that the time for easy answers is over. The only way forward is through the heart of the paradox into the unknown. The stage is set, the stakes are clear, the great question hangs in the air, waiting for you to answer. And so you stand at the threshold, poised between fear and freedom, conformity and individuality, the safety of the crowd, and the perilous beauty of standing alone. The choice is yours. The journey has just begun. You wake the next morning with the question still echoing in your mind, haunting the edges of your consciousness. Why does society fear the individual? The world outside your window seems unchanged, but you sense the invisible machinery at work, the subtle gears of culture and psychology grinding beneath the surface. You realize that to understand this fear, you must look deeper, beyond the rituals of daily life, beyond the masks people wear, into the hidden architecture of the human mind and the collective soul. You remember the first time you felt the pressure to conform. Maybe it was in a classroom, where the teacher's approval depended on your ability to echo the right answers. Maybe it was at home, where love was conditional on obedience, where difference was met with silence or scorn. Or maybe it was in the unspoken rules of friendship, the way laughter could turn to ridicule in an instant, the way the group could close ranks and leave you shivering on the outside. You realize now that these moments were not isolated. They were the first lessons in a curriculum designed to teach you the cost of standing alone. You begin to see the outlines of a hidden problem, one that is both ancient and ever-present. Society, you realize, is not a monolith but a living organism, a vast network of minds bound together by shared beliefs, fears, and desires. Its survival depends on cohesion, on the ability to coordinate action, to maintain order in the face of chaos. The individual, by contrast, is a wild card, a source of unpredictability, a reminder that the world could be otherwise. The tension between these two forces is the engine of history, the source of both progress and repression. You recall the words of Carl Jung, who spoke of the collective unconscious, the deep reservoir of symbols, myths, and instincts that shape human behavior. Jung understood that society is built on archetypes, on the repetition of familiar patterns. The individual who breaks these patterns threatens the stability of the whole, calling into question the very foundations of meaning. You wonder, is the fear of the individual rooted in something deeper than social custom? Is it a primal instinct, a survival mechanism encoded in our DNA? You think of Friedrich Nietzsche, who warned of the dangers of the herd mentality, the tendency of people to surrender their will to the group, to seek safety in numbers, to avoid the pain of thinking for themselves. Nietzsche saw the individual as a creator, a force of nature capable of transcending the limitations of the collective. But he also knew that such individuals are rare, and that the herd will always seek to crush those who threaten its unity. You feel the weight of this insight, the sense that society's fear of the individual is not just a matter of preference, but a matter of survival. You remember Arthur Schopenhauer, who wrote of the will to live, the blind, insatiable force that drives all beings to persist, to reproduce, to dominate. For Schopenhauer, individuality was both a blessing and a curse, a source of suffering, but also the only path to meaning. You wonder if society's fear of the individual is at its core a fear of suffering, a fear that difference will lead to conflict, to pain, to the unraveling of the fragile order we have built. You recall Aldous Huxley's vision of a dystopian future, where individuality is suppressed in the name of stability, where people are conditioned from birth to accept their place in the hierarchy, to find happiness in conformity. Huxley understood that the price of peace is often the death of the soul, that a society without individuals is a society without meaning. You wonder if we are living in the world Huxley warned about, if the comforts of modern life have come at the cost of our deepest selves. You think of Jean-Paul Sartre, who declared that existence precedes essence, that we are condemned to be free, to invent ourselves in a world without fixed meaning. Sartre saw the individual as a source of anxiety, both for themselves and for others. To be truly free is to be responsible for your own choices, to stand alone in the face of the void. You realize that society's fear of the individual is in part a fear of freedom, a fear of the unknown, of the chaos that lurks beyond the boundaries of the familiar. You remember Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of the concentration camps and emerged with a profound insight that meaning is not given but created, that each person must find their own purpose in the face of suffering. Frankl saw the individual as a source of hope, a beacon of light in the darkness, but he also knew that society often resists those who refuse to accept the roles assigned to them, who insist on creating their own meaning. You begin to see how these philosophical insights are reflected in the workings of the human mind. You recall the experiments of social psychologists, the studies that reveal our deep need for belonging, our fear of rejection, our tendency to conform even when we know it is wrong. You think of Solomon Asch's famous conformity experiments, where people denied the evidence of their own eyes to fit in with the group. You think of Stanley Milgram's obedience studies, where ordinary people committed acts of cruelty simply because an authority figure told them to. You realize that the fear of the individual is not just a social phenomenon, but a psychological one, a reflection of our deepest anxieties and desires. You feel the tension in your own mind, the pull between the desire to be yourself and the need to belong. You remember times when you silenced your own voice to avoid conflict, when you hid your true feelings to fit in. You wonder how many others are doing the same, living lives of quiet desperation, longing to break free but afraid of what might happen if they do. You begin to see how this hidden force shapes every aspect of human life. It is there in the way we raise our children, teaching them to obey, to fit in, to avoid standing out. It is there in the way we design our institutions, rewarding conformity and punishing dissent. It is there in the stories we tell, the heroes we celebrate, the villains we fear. You realize that society's fear of the individual is not just a matter of policy or custom, but a deep, pervasive force that shapes our very sense of self. You feel the weight of this realization, the sense that something vital is at stake. You wonder what it would mean to live in a world that truly embraced individuality, that saw difference not as a threat but as a source of strength. You sense that the path to such a world is fraught with danger, that the forces of conformity are powerful and deeply entrenched. You begin to notice the subtle ways in which society enforces conformity, not through overt violence, but through 1,000 small acts of exclusion, ridicule, and indifference. You see it in the way people who are different are marginalized, pathologized, or simply ignored. You see it in the way creativity is celebrated in theory, but suppressed in practice, in the way innovation is welcomed only when it serves the interests of the group. You realize that the fear of the individual is not just a problem for the outsiders, but for everyone. It is the force that keeps us from realizing our full potential, that stifles creativity, that turns life into a series of empty rituals. You wonder what it would take to break free from this hidden prison, to reclaim the right to be yourself in a world that wants you to be anything but. You sense that the answer lies not in rebellion for its own sake, but in a deeper understanding of the forces at work. You realize that the fear of the individual is rooted in the very structure of the human mind, in the ancient struggle between the need for safety and the longing for freedom. You see that this struggle is not just external, but internal, a battle fought in the depths of your own soul. You begin to ask yourself new questions. What would it mean to embrace your individuality, not as a rejection of the group, but as a gift to it? What would it mean to create a society that honors both the needs of the collective and the rights of the individual? Is such a balance possible, or is the tension between these forces an inescapable part of the human condition? You feel the tension building, the sense that you are on the verge of a breakthrough. You know that the answers will not come easily, that the path ahead is uncertain, but you also sense that the journey is necessary, that the only way to truly live is to confront the fear that keeps us small. As the day draws to a close, you are left with a sense of urgency, a feeling that the time for easy answers is over. The hidden problem has been revealed, but its consequences have yet to be fully understood. You sense that the next step is to explore the ways in which this fear shapes our lives, to uncover the unseen consequences that flow from society's fear of the individual. The night deepens, and with it, the sense of anticipation. You know that the journey is far from over, that the most important questions have yet to be asked. The stage is set, the stakes are clear, the hidden problem has been revealed, but its full impact remains to be seen. And so you stand at the threshold once more, poised between understanding and action, between insight and transformation. The journey continues, and the next step awaits. You wake to a world that feels both familiar and strange, as if the very air has thickened with the weight of unspoken truths. The hidden problem has been revealed, but now you sense its shadow everywhere, an invisible hand shaping your thoughts, your choices, your very sense of self. You move through your day with new eyes, attuned to the subtle ways society's fear of the individual seeps into every corner of existence. It is not just a distant, abstract force, it is a living presence, a silent architect of reality. You notice it first in the smallest of gestures. The way a colleague hesitates before sharing an unconventional idea, glancing around the room for signs of approval or disapproval. The way a friend's laughter falters when their opinion diverges from the group, their voice shrinking as if to apologize for daring to be different. You see it in yourself too, in the way you edit your words, soften your edges, hide your true feelings behind a mask of agreeable neutrality. Each moment is a negotiation, a calculation. How much of yourself can you reveal before you risk being cast out? You begin to realize that the consequences of society's fear of the individual are not just external, they are internalized, woven into the fabric of your mind. You recall the concept of internalized oppression, the way people come to police themselves, to enforce the very norms that constrain them. You see how the fear of standing out becomes a habit, a reflex, a silent voice whispering, "Don't be too much, don't be too different, don't make them uncomfortable." You wonder how many dreams have died in silence, how many lives have been lived in the shadows, all because of this unseen force. You think of the cognitive biases that shape human behavior, the shortcuts your mind takes to avoid discomfort and uncertainty. You recall the confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out information that confirms what you already believe, to avoid the pain of cognitive dissonance. You see how this bias reinforces conformity, how it makes the unfamiliar seem dangerous, the different seem wrong. You remember the bandwagon effect, the way people are drawn to the safety of the majority, the comfort of the crowd. You realize that these biases are not just quirks of the mind, they are the mechanisms by which society maintains its grip on the individual. You begin to see how these unseen forces shape the stories we tell about ourselves and each other. You notice the way language itself is used to police difference, to mark the boundaries of the acceptable. Words like eccentric, weird, troublemaker, each one a warning, a signal that someone has strayed too far from the norm. You see how these labels become self-fulfilling prophecies, how people learn to shrink themselves to fit the mold, to hide the parts of themselves that do not belong. You feel the urgency of this realization, the sense that something precious is being lost. You wonder what the world would look like if people were free to be themselves, if the fear of the individual were replaced by a celebration of difference. You imagine a world where creativity is not just tolerated but embraced, where dissent is not punished but welcomed as a sign of vitality. You sense that such a world is possible, but that it will not come easily. The forces of conformity are powerful, and their consequences are everywhere. You see it in the way institutions are designed to reward sameness and punish deviation. In schools, children are taught to follow instructions, to memorize the right answers, to suppress their curiosity in favor of obedience. Those who question, who challenge, who refuse to fit in, are labeled as problems, their uniqueness pathologized and medicated. You wonder how many potential geniuses have been lost to this system, how many lives have been diminished by the relentless pressure to conform. You see it in the workplace, where innovation is praised in theory but punished in practice. The employee who dares to challenge the status quo is often sidelined, their ideas dismissed as impractical or disruptive. You notice how meetings become rituals of agreement, how dissent is smoothed over with platitudes and empty gestures. You realize that the cost of conformity is not just personal, it is collective. A society that fears the individual is a society that stagnates, that loses its capacity for renewal and growth. You see it in politics, where leaders promise change but demand loyalty above all else. The dissenter, the whistleblower, the radical thinker, each is treated as a threat, a danger to the fragile order of things. You notice how public discourse becomes a performance, a contest to see who can best echo the prevailing narrative. You wonder what truths are being silenced, what possibilities are being foreclosed, all because of the fear of the individual. You begin to sense the deeper consequences of this fear, the way it shapes not just institutions, but the very structure of reality. You recall the insights of neuroscience, the way the brain is wired for social connection, for the safety of the group. You remember the pain of social rejection, the way it activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. You realize that the fear of standing alone is not just psychological, it is biological, a survival mechanism honed by millennia of evolution. But you also see how this mechanism can become a trap, a prison that keeps you from realizing your full potential. You notice how the need for approval becomes an addiction, how the fear of rejection becomes a cage, You wonder how many people have lived and died without ever knowing who they truly are, their lives shaped by the invisible hand of conformity. You feel the urgency of escape, the sense that something vital is at stake. You realize that the consequences of society's fear of the individual are not just personal, they are existential. A world that suppresses individuality is a world that loses its soul, that becomes a machine grinding out sameness, predictability, and mediocrity. You wonder what it would take to break free from this trap, to reclaim the right to be yourself in a world that wants you to be anything but. You begin to notice the subtle ways in which resistance is punished, the quiet violence of exclusion and ridicule. You see how those who refuse to conform are marginalized, their voices drowned out by the roar of the crowd. You notice how the fear of being different becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, how people learn to hide their true selves, to play roles that are not their own. You wonder how many lives have been wasted in this way, how much potential has been lost to the relentless pressure to fit in. You see the consequences in the rise of anxiety, depression, and alienation, the epidemic of loneliness that haunts modern life. You realize that these are not just individual problems, but symptoms of a deeper malaise, a society that has lost its way. You wonder what it would take to heal this wound, to create a world where people are free to be themselves, where difference is not just tolerated but celebrated. You feel the urgency of this realization, the sense that the time for complacency is over. You know that the path to freedom will not be easy, that the forces of conformity are powerful and deeply entrenched. But you also sense that the journey is necessary, that the only way to truly live is to confront the fear that keeps us small. You begin to imagine a different world, a world where individuality is not a threat but a gift. You see the possibility of a society that honors the unique spark in each person, that sees diversity not as a problem to be managed, but as a source of strength. You wonder what it would take to build such a world, what sacrifices would be required, what risks would need to be taken. You realize that the first step is to recognize the unseen consequences of society's fear of the individual, to name the problem, to bring it into the light. You know that this will not be easy, that the forces of denial and repression are strong, but you also sense that the time for silence is over, that the only way forward is through the heart of the paradox into the unknown. As the day draws to a close, you are left with a sense of urgency, a feeling that the time for easy answers is over. The unseen consequences have been revealed, but the path to freedom remains uncertain. You sense that the next step is to explore the possibility of rebellion, to imagine what it would mean to break free from the invisible chains of conformity. The night deepens, and with it, the sense of anticipation. You know that the journey is far from over, that the most important questions have yet to be asked. The stage is set, the stakes are clear, the unseen consequences have been revealed, but the possibility of escape remains to be explored. And so you stand at the threshold once more, poised between despair and hope, between resignation and rebellion. The journey continues, and the next step awaits. You wake before dawn, the city still shrouded in darkness, the world hushed as if holding its breath. The weight of conformity presses on your chest, but beneath it, something stirs, a flicker of defiance, a whisper of possibility. You realize that the time for silent suffering is over. The unseen consequences have become unbearable, the cost of hiding your true self too high. You sense that rebellion is not just an option, but a necessity, a call to arms against the invisible tyranny that has shaped your life. You rise and move through the quiet streets, each step a small act of resistance. The world feels different now, charged with the electricity of potential. You remember the stories of those who broke free, who refused to be defined by the expectations of others. You think of Galileo, who looked through his telescope and saw a universe that defied the dogmas of his time. You think of Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat, her quiet act of defiance igniting a movement. You think of artists, poets, and visionaries who risked everything to speak their truth, to live as themselves in a world that demanded conformity. You realize that rebellion does not always look like revolution. Sometimes it is a whisper, a refusal, a single step off the well-worn path. It is the courage to say no when everyone else says yes, to ask questions when others accept easy answers, to create when the world demands repetition. You feel the power of these small acts, the way they ripple outward, challenging the foundations of the collective. You begin to see that the first act of rebellion is internal, a radical shift in perspective, a willingness to question the stories you have been told about who you are and what is possible. You remember the words of Nietzsche, "Become who you are." You realize that this is not a call to selfishness, but to authenticity, to the difficult, often painful work of discovering your true self beneath the layers of expectation and fear. You look in the mirror and see not just a face, but a battleground, a place where the forces of conformity and individuality wage their silent war. You notice the scars left by years of self-censorship, the habits of thought that keep you small. You realize that breaking free will require more than defiance. It will require compassion, patience, and a willingness to face the parts of yourself you have long denied. You begin to experiment with small acts of rebellion. You speak your mind in a meeting, even when your voice trembles. You wear clothes that express your true style, even if they draw curious glances. You share an unpopular opinion, risking the discomfort of disagreement. Each act is a test, a way of measuring the strength of the invisible chains that bind you. You discover that the fear of rejection is often worse than the reality, that the world does not end when you step out of line. You notice that rebellion is contagious. Your courage inspires others, giving them permission to be themselves. You see the way a single act of honesty can break the spell of conformity, opening a space for real connection. You realize that the collective is not a monolith, but a tapestry of individuals, each longing for the freedom to be seen and heard. You sense that true community is built not on sameness, but on the celebration of difference. You begin to study the lives of those who have broken free, searching for clues, for strategies, for hope. You read about the existentialists who embraced the absurdity of existence and found meaning in the act of creation. You learn from the Stoics, who taught that true freedom lies in mastering your own mind, in choosing your response to the world. You are inspired by the stories of those who have faced exile, ridicule, and even death for the sake of their individuality. You realize that the path of rebellion is not easy, but it is the only path that leads to true freedom. You start to see the world differently. The rules that once seemed immutable now appear arbitrary. The boundaries of the possible begin to blur. You question the assumptions that have shaped your life. What if success is not about fitting in, but about standing out? What if happiness is not found in approval, but in authenticity? What if the greatest gift you can give the world is your true self, unfiltered and unafraid? You begin to notice the ways in which society resists change, the subtle and not-so-subtle punishments meted out to those who refuse to conform. You see the price paid by whistleblowers, by artists who challenge the status quo, by thinkers who refuse to be silenced. You realize that rebellion always comes with risk, that the world will not always welcome your difference, but you also see the rewards, the sense of aliveness, the joy of creation, the deep satisfaction of living in alignment with your values. You start to build a new way of thinking, one that honors both your individuality and your connection to others. You realize that rebellion is not about isolation, but about authenticity, about bringing your whole self to the world and inviting others to do the same. You begin to seek out those who share your values, who are willing to question, to create, to dream. You form alliances, build communities, create spaces where difference is not just tolerated but celebrated. You notice that the more you embrace your individuality, the less power the collective has over you. The opinions of others lose their sting. The pressure to conform begins to fade. You find yourself drawn to those who are unapologetically themselves, who live with courage and conviction. You realize that these are the people who change the world, not by force, but by example, by showing what is possible when you refuse to be defined by the crowd. You begin to see rebellion as a form of love, a love for yourself, for others, for the world as it could be. You realize that the greatest act of rebellion is to live as if you are already free, to refuse to let fear dictate your choices. You sense that this is the true meaning of courage, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. You start to imagine a world transformed by rebellion, a world where creativity flourishes, where difference is a source of strength, where each person is free to become who they are. You see the possibility of a society that honors both the needs of the collective and the rights of the individual, that finds balance in the dance between unity and diversity. You realize that this world will not be given to you. You must create it, one act of rebellion at a time. You feel the power of this realization, the sense that you are part of something larger than yourself. You see the way your actions ripple outward, inspiring others to break free, to question, to create. You realize that the journey is not just about you. It is about all those who have been silenced, all those who have been told they are too much, too different, too strange. You sense that your rebellion is a gift, a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needs it. You begin to live with intention, to choose your actions not out of fear, but out of love. You seek out experiences that challenge you, that force you to grow. You surround yourself with people who support your journey, who celebrate your victories, and help you learn from your failures. You realize that the path of rebellion is not a straight line, but a spiral, a journey of becoming, of returning to yourself again and again. You notice that the more you embrace your individuality, the more you are able to connect with others. You find that true intimacy is only possible when you are willing to be vulnerable, to show your true self. You realize that the collective is not the enemy, but the context in which your individuality finds meaning. You begin to see the possibility of a new kind of society, one that honors both the needs of the group and the rights of the individual, that finds strength in diversity and unity in difference. You feel the urgency of this vision, the sense that the time for rebellion is now. You know that the forces of conformity are powerful, that the journey will not be easy, but you also sense that the rewards are worth the risk, that the only way to truly live is to break free from the invisible chains that bind you. As the sun rises and the city comes to life, you are filled with a sense of possibility. You know that the journey is far from over, that the most important challenges lie ahead, but you also sense that you are no longer alone, that you are part of a movement, a rebellion that is as old as humanity itself. The day stretches before you, filled with promise and peril. You know that the path of rebellion is not for the faint of heart, that it will require courage, resilience, and a willingness to face the unknown. But you also sense that the journey is necessary, that the only way to truly live is to embrace your individuality, to claim your place in the world. And so you step into the light, ready to face whatever comes. The rebellion has begun, and the world will never be the same. You stand at the edge of dawn, the world awash in the first golden light, and for a moment, everything is silent. The rebellion has begun, not as a riot in the streets, but as a quiet revolution within your own soul. You feel the aftershocks of your choices, the subtle tremors of a life lived in defiance of the invisible chains. Yet as you look out over the city, you sense that something even deeper is waiting to be discovered, a truth that has eluded you through all the cycles of conformity and rebellion, a realization that will change everything. You close your eyes and listen to the pulse of your own heart, the steady rhythm that has carried you through fear, through doubt, through the long night of the soul. You realize that the journey was never about escaping society, nor about waging war against the collective. It was about something far more profound, the reclamation of your own being, the rediscovery of the self that exists before the world's expectations, before the stories you were told, before the masks you learned to wear. You remember the paradox that haunted you from the beginning. Society fears the individual, yet it cannot survive without them. The collective is nourished by the creativity, the courage, the vision of those who dare to stand alone. Every great leap forward, every work of art, every scientific breakthrough, every act of compassion began with a single person who refused to be defined by the crowd. You realize now that the ultimate truth is not a choice between self and society, but a reconciliation of the two, a dance in which each gives meaning to the other. You see it in the faces of those around you, the quiet longing for authenticity, the hunger for connection that can only be satisfied when people meet as their true selves. You realize that the fear of the individual is, at its core, a fear of the unknown, a terror of the infinite possibilities that arise when someone steps outside the script. But you also see that this fear is the birthplace of all that is beautiful and new. Without it, there would be no growth, no change, no life. You begin to understand that the journey of the individual is not a solitary one. Every act of self-discovery, every moment of courage, sends ripples through the collective, inviting others to do the same. You realize that your rebellion was never just for you. It was a gift to the world, a beacon for those still trapped in the shadows of conformity. You see now that the ultimate act of individuality is not separation, but communion. The willingness to bring your whole self to the table, to risk being seen, to invite others to do the same. You recall the words of Viktor Frankl, who found meaning in the darkest of places. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. You realize that the power to transform society lies not in the overthrow of systems, but in the transformation of hearts and minds. The true revolution is internal, a shift in consciousness, a willingness to see yourself and others as unique, irreplaceable, and worthy of love. You feel the weight of this realization settle over you, both terrifying and liberating. You understand now that the fear of the individual is a mirror, reflecting the collective's own uncertainty, its longing for meaning, its terror of chaos. To embrace your individuality is to hold up that mirror, to force the world to confront its own contradictions. It is an act of radical honesty, a refusal to pretend that the answers are simple or the path is clear. You see that the ultimate truth is not about victory or defeat, but about presence, the willingness to inhabit your own life fully, to stand in the light and the darkness, to accept both your power and your vulnerability. You realize that the journey never really ends, that each day is a new invitation to choose authenticity over safety, courage over comfort, love over fear. You look back on the path you have traveled, the moments of doubt, the nights of despair, the flashes of insight that lit your way. You see now that each step was necessary, that the pain and the joy were both teachers, guiding you toward a deeper understanding of yourself and the world. You realize that the ultimate truth is not something you can possess, but something you must live, moment by moment, breath by breath, choice by choice. You begin to see the world with new eyes. The faces in the crowd are no longer strangers, but fellow travelers, each carrying their own burdens, their own dreams, their own secret rebellions. You realize that the collective is not an enemy to be defeated, but a community to be healed, a tapestry woven from the threads of a million unique lives. You sense that your task is not to withdraw from the world, but to engage with it more deeply, to bring your whole self to every encounter, to invite others to do the same. You feel the power of this insight, the way it dissolves the old dichotomies, self versus society, freedom versus belonging, rebellion versus conformity. You realize that the true challenge is not to escape the collective, but to transform it from within, to become a catalyst for change, a source of inspiration, a living example of what is possible when fear is replaced by love. You remember the words of Jean-Paul Sartre, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you." You realize that your past, with all its wounds and disappointments, is not a prison but a crucible, a place where your true self was forged. You see that every act of courage, every moment of honesty, has prepared you for this moment, this realization, this new way of being. You begin to imagine a world transformed by this insight, a world where people are free to be themselves, where difference is not just tolerated but celebrated, where the collective is strengthened by the uniqueness of its members. You see the possibility of a society that honors both the needs of the group and the rights of the individual, that finds balance in the dance between unity and diversity. You realize that this world will not be given to you. You must create it, one act of courage at a time. You sense that the journey is not about arriving at a final destination, but about living each day with intention, with presence, with love. You know that the forces of conformity will always be there, that the fear of the individual will never fully disappear, but you also know that you have the power to choose, to create, to inspire. You feel the urgency of this realization, the sense that the time for waiting is over. The world is hungry for authenticity, for connection, for meaning. You know that your life is a message, a testament to what is possible when you refuse to be defined by the crowd. You sense that your greatest gift is not your perfection, but your willingness to be seen, to be vulnerable, to be real. You look out over the city, the sun now fully risen, the world alive with possibility. You realize that the ultimate truth is both simple and profound. You are not alone. Your journey is part of a larger story, a movement toward greater freedom, greater love, greater understanding. You sense that the world is waiting for you. Not the version of you that fits in, but the one that stands out, that dares to be different, that refuses to settle for less than the truth. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight and the wonder of your own existence. You know that the journey will not be easy, that there will be days when the old fears return, when the pressure to conform feels overwhelming. But you also know that you have tasted freedom, that you have glimpsed the possibility of a life lived in alignment with your deepest values. You realize that the ultimate truth is not a destination, but a way of being, a commitment to authenticity, to courage, to love. You sense that the world is changed by your presence, that every act of honesty, every moment of kindness, every refusal to hide is a step toward a new reality. You walk into the day, the city alive around you, the future unwritten. You know that nothing will ever be the same, that you have crossed a threshold from which there is no return. You feel the power of your own individuality, the strength of your own voice, the beauty of your own becoming. And as you move through the world, you carry with you the ultimate truth, that to be yourself is the greatest act of rebellion, the highest form of love, the only way to truly live. The journey continues, and the world awaits your next step.